Howdy, my name is Tori Jackson. Pronouns are they, them. I'm the coordinator of the LGBTQ+ Pride Center in the offices of the Dean of Student Life here at Texas A&M University. I'd like to start off by thanking our panelists, Dr. Iris Carillo, Claire and Tommy, Claire and Tommy are interns in our Office of CAPS, for taking the time to come talk with us about LGBTQ mental health. They have a presentation, and then we will be taking some audience questions. You can submit those questions over Facebook Live. And with that, I would like to invite y'all to start your presentation.
Sounds good.
There we go.
Take it away, Dr. Carillo.
Everyone, to our queer mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic, a collaboration between CAPS and the LGBTQ+ Pride Center. Like Claire mentioned, my name is Dr. Iris Carrillo, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm an assistant director and director of diversity and inclusion at CAPS. And so today we have Tommy being co-host and changing our slides. And so we're just going to be addressing some, talking about some of the current concerns that some of our LGBTQ+ students may be facing, being back home, potentially in environments that are not very supportive, that could potentially be abusive. And so how to kind of manage some of the anxiety, stress that may cause for some of our trans, non-binary, gender fluid students who are not able to live their authentic lives. The increased dysphoria that may cause, potentially causing some more distress than they usually struggle with here on campus due to the loss of social support, social connections that are so important here at A&M. And so we'll be talking about some ways of managing some of that stress that students may be experiencing right now. I think some other things to highlight are, some of the economic concerns that some of our students may be facing, as well as some housing concerns, some homelessness issues that some of our students may be facing, some food insecurity that some of our students are facing. And so these are all challenges that are just like having difficulties meeting basic needs due to various of their circumstances. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about the importance of social connection, of finding spaces, people where we can feel affirmed and valued. And so those are some of the things that we'll be talking about today. You will see the three of us kind of jump in back and forth and try to have a conversation around some of these issues. So Tommy, Claire, anything else that you want to bring up in terms of some of the concerns that some of our students may be struggling with at this time?
I think you hit upon some of the most important factors there, and certainly there's a lot more to get to, so I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, great opening. I think you really grounded us, I think, in the reality of what some students may be experiencing, and I'm grateful that all of us are here to be able to talk about this a little bit more. To try to get some resources out there for our students.
Okay, so so our next slide is about managing emotions. Claire, take it away.
Yeah, so the thing is, I feel like a lot of times, especially when our emotions are really strong, we want to be able to control them because sometimes they're uncomfortable. It's really hard to sit in that discomfort. And then when you add all the other layers that are COVID-19 and the transitions and changes, and then you add any unique layers in terms of somebody identifying within the Q+ community, within their family or friends, or again, kind of like those factors of housing concerns or food insecurity, loss of jobs and all of that type of thing, we want to control something because there's so much that feels out of control. And so I think talking honestly about managing emotions, we'll talk about accepting emotions, and this is like some tough stuff. So I just want to lay that out there, that this isn't easy. But I have two like color wheels on here that are emotion wheels, feelings. So both of them kind of have the core feeling in the center, and then they branch out. So sometimes, especially if you're looking at the one on the right, there's just more options there. You may recognize that you're feeling inferior. And so you can kind of trace that down then to insecurity, and then that goes down to fear. So it's helpful for us to name the emotions that we are having. We can't control the emotions that we do have, but by naming them, we at least have an idea of like what's going on. And sometimes we may try to either avoid the emotions, push it down, push it away, have some kind of reaction to it. But the thing is that our emotions are telling us something, and they're important, and we need to honor them. And having an opportunity to check in with ourselves is really important part of this process, as we all are having, and students, you all are having like these internal experiences while you're also impacted externally. So Tom, if you want to hit the next slide.
I do.
You're great. So just in terms of accepting emotions, just giving a little shout out to, we have a few workshops on our CAPS webpage now that we used to do in person, and now we're making them on video online into shorter videos. So we do have an accepting emotions workshop. The one thing though that I pulled from here, and that's just kind of a simple tagline reminder for us to kind of process our emotions and acknowledge them, is RIO. So that involves recognition, insight, and openness. And so having the opportunity, like we said on the other slide, the recognition, the naming. So checking in, like, what's going on with me right now? How am I feeling? What am I feeling? And then kind of being curious about that. Sometimes we can be self-critical and be like, why am I feeling like this? And I shouldn't be feeling like that, or I don't want to feel like this. So the insight part is listening to understand yourself and be curious, like, where's this coming from? And then the openness part of this is just reminding ourselves to be in the moment, and to listen as we're going through recognition and insight, and be open to hearing what maybe our emotions are trying to tell us. It's about, the openness is about that accepting that this is the emotional experience that I'm having right now, and that's legitimate and that's valid. And I'm allowed to have these feelings, and then to be able to, from this moment forward, decide, how do you want to move forward with this, with knowing this, with taking this in, with accepting these emotions? How do I now want to proceed? Versus kind of just being reactive or trying to avoid and push things away, which might end up pushing like ourselves away from other people, or even like what's going on internally with us. That's kind of the gist of that. So whoever's next, roll out.
Well, Claire, I wanted to bring something up real quick.
Let's go.
Because when I was looking at the color wheel, that last slide, I thought those were so good. And they're also a reminder that like a lot of these more complex emotions kind of look similar to one another. They occupy like pretty similar spaces in those different quadrants. And it can be so difficult sometimes to kind of pin down exactly what the feeling is.
Yeah.
Like, is there anything that any of us find helpful in like trying to discern and come up with a label for any of our emotions when they feel confusing?
I'll just jump in with that. I'm gonna point to Sanvello, the mental wellness app, because literally it'll ask you to check in, how are you doing? And I will tell my clients all the time that even though this is my job, I still have a hard time identifying what my emotions are. Mm-hmm. And so when I can like look at, they have all those different sections. I can go down and literally look through lists of words, of emotions, and I can say, oh, no, I'm not really feeling like that, but this is like resonating more. So for me, like seeing something externally, whether it's the color wheel or it's those drop down lists on Sambello, those are things externally that do help me when I have the opportunity to see them. Anybody else?
usually
For me,
find,
sometimes.
no, please continue.
Oh, just that sometimes journaling can be helpful, just kind of, writing it out, and maybe we start off thinking that we feel a certain way, and as we explore that feeling or that situation, we realize that maybe there are even more feelings, or that, for example, our anger that we felt was really kind of just masking some disappointment or some hurt. And so that sometimes is helpful in figuring out maybe what the true feeling is, or the complexity of the emotions that we're feeling in the moment. So I usually tell students that, journaling is an excellent way of kind of being able to process and name what they're feeling.
I think that journaling is so good and useful, and I think it can be such a skill to develop in terms of like doing that emotional exploration. I find that for me, when I usually get to pinpoint something much faster when I talk it out with somebody else. And at the same time, sometimes it takes me longer to actually go to take the step to talk to somebody else first. And so I don't know which is faster, to like start journaling and try to uncover it, or if I can convince myself more quickly to talk to somebody else through it. That would, I think, be the ideal for me.
Yeah, that's a great question that you started, Tommy. Because there are a whole bunch of different ways. And sorry, Iris, what were you saying?
No, it's great that we have so many different ideas. That I think it also, like, some of us may internalize, and so that moment of self-reflection with the journaling may be our go-to, and others of us may externalize, and so reaching out to a partner, a friend, may be our approach. Sometimes it's a 1-2 approach, that sometimes we can journal to clarify our thoughts that we then want to take to our person to further explore. So I think it could be any of these combinations. And I think that leads perfectly into our next slide, which I think it's communication tips. Is that correct?
Oh, exactly right.
Yeah, so just some communication tips. I tend to tell my students, that none of us that I know of, are usually taught effective communication skills. We're not taught that usually in our homes. We're not taught about it in the media, social media. And so these are skills that we can pick up, and it's always a good time to, develop more effective communication skills. So we thought that this might be something good to bring up today and kind of talk about some of the elements of effective communication. And so one of those is using I statements to express how you're feeling in the moment and why. And so saying, I am feeling really disappointed that, I'm unable to be on campus and be with my friends. And so using an I statement with the feeling, or I am feeling hurt that you insist on not using my pronouns. And so sometimes when we use I statements and the feeling and the reason why we feel that way, it can potentially allow the other person to not be as defensive, versus if we just go straight out with a you, like, you keep on doing this and misusing my pronouns, and that other person may feel defensive in that moment. And so how can we use the I statements? Can we be clear and direct what we need and want from the other person? So I really need for you to use my pronouns and my name in this home as we're trying to interact together. Actively listen to the other person's response. We can recognize the other person's intention, but highlight the impact of their words and behavior. So sometimes parents, friends, partners may have a certain intention, but that is definitely not the impact of their words and behaviors. And so how can we differentiate between the two? do not feel like you need to defend your feelings or continuously educate others. And so if in the past you have brought some kind of pamphlet for your parents or suggested a book or suggested for them to become a part of PFLAG, you don't constantly have to continue educating. You can say, hey, I sent you, the name of that book. It'd be great if you could read it so that you could educate yourself more on this. Or if you could join PFLAG to learn more about how to be a parent to someone who's Q+. And then restating how you feel again and what you need and want from them. And then we have a second slide on that. Tommy, if you can. Now, being direct is difficult, especially with people with whom we have longer histories. And being direct can represent a change, and that change could be met with resistance, especially among families. However, this is the best way to get our needs met with family, friends, and partners. And so it is going to take some adjusting for us to start using some of those new ways of communicating, and it's definitely take adjustment from our friends, family, and partners because they're used to a different dynamic. And so this is going to be a shift for a lot of us. But ideally, this would be the way that we're communicating how we're feeling and what we're needing from each other.
Yeah, I think that teaching others, especially when it comes to matters of our identities and, what our pronouns, things of that nature, things that may not be as typical for, some friends and family members to manage well. I think that can be exhausting. And it's so hard and such a burden, I think, to always feel like you have to be in the role of a teacher. At the same time, learning how to be direct and firm with people, I think, is the fastest way to ensure that at least you're clear about what your expectations are, and that if you're hoping to maintain solid boundaries and good relationships with people, that these are just kind of the baseline levels of respect and decency that you're asking for in exchange for continuing to have goodwill among you.
Yeah, and I think that this helps us be able to effectively set healthy boundaries, which is something that Tommy is going to be talking about in a moment, that, to be able to communicate what we need in order to be able to set, and I think even more importantly, enforce healthy boundaries, because sometimes it's way easier to say, hey, this is my boundary, but when people start to push it, that's where it starts to get really difficult, that we have to enforce the boundary and potentially have some consequences in that relationship.
Mm-hmm. I guess I just want to acknowledge, like, with all of that too, is kind of, Tommy, you kind of alluded to that process of maybe this is like a quicker way to be able to communicate directly of this is what I'm asking for. And sometimes I think we can sit with, especially folks within the community, can sit with this feeling before you're even out or out to whomever or wherever, and whatever that is, that there's that holding on of like, I'm just going to keep it. I'm just going to keep holding it and dealing with this and dealing with whatever my family members or my friends or whatever situation I'm in. And that can really wear on you. And so thinking about for you, wherever you are now, of what is going to be direct communication for you in a safe way, but also in a way that's like putting responsibility on other people where responsibility is due. So you're not responsible for everything and everybody. But I think when we have an opportunity to be direct, then we're taking a little bit of like that weight off of us, because we're putting on somebody else. And if they're not going to respect that boundary, like that's on them if you've already kind of set that. And I know that that's like a very tricky place to be. It's not easy, but I just kind of wanted to add that as we kind of then shift into Tommy talking about the healthy boundaries and stuff.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I think that you bring up a really good point about safety. And so, you know, recognizing when it's safe or not safe to have these communications with people, especially parents, and how to be strategic. And so I go back to the journaling, that if we can't voice, you know, our emotions, you know, out loud to our parents or a partner, if it's a relationship that's a little bit on the rocks, a little bit unhealthy, can we then use, you know, journaling to do that? Or can we communicate some of this to a friend who can listen instead of the intended party, just so that we don't keep all that stuff bottled in, but we can, you said, even if it's not to the person with whom we would like to be having those conversations. So I think, you know, it was an excellent point about safety and recognizing when it is safe and when it's not, and being strategic about it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight Iris's point about reaching out to chosen family. Like, if you're not in a place where you can have that affirmation, like physically there, like do lean on your other support system and stuff. Chosen family, we know, is so important to the LGBT community.
Yeah, definitely.
So one of the things that I think has been helpful to clients, especially some of my Q+ clients, I think we've all been impacted in seeing that our typical structures have fallen away. Things that we expected, typical ways that we start our day, the routine that we had maybe back on campus is no longer the way that it was. And even for people who have stayed on campus through the spring, like, it's so bizarre not going to physical classes anymore and seeing so many of our friends and professors and other people who we've got relationships with on campus. So I wanted to highlight some things that I think are useful and evidence-based to kind of help the transition wherever anyone is, and help this be kind of a healthier time. So first, I always kind of go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, what are some of those basic physiological things that we all have to pay attention to in order to function well? So this would be sleep hygiene. And something that I recommend is I know so many of my students are real night owls and have highly irregular hours. But this is such a great time to have some consistency in terms of sleep and say, okay, this is, you know, a bedtime that I'm comfortable with. This is when I like waking up, and noticing how you feel with different amounts of sleep. And sleep doesn't come as easily to everyone. So if that includes adherence to medication, if that includes things that are idiosyncratic to you, like, let's say, temperature needs to be a certain thing. I can only have this many blankets. I need this many pillows. I have to have this scent and a white noise machine. I know I have to have my animals all with me. That really helps me a lot. But paying attention to sleep right now is so important to all of our health. I would say, to the degree that it's possible, and always with like physical distancing, integrating some physical activity in the day we know is really helpful for improving mental health. And so going on walks, if possible, you know, through neighborhoods. I like taking my pets wherever I go. And this is also a time where maybe developing a new practice, whether it is more rigorous like running or more gentle like different kinds of yoga, just getting some movement in your body and learning your body and feeling more connected to it, I think is really helpful during this time. We've also talked about journaling a little bit, and I think that is going to continue to be helpful as a reminder to start doing that, whether it's something you do on your phone, or I know for me, I spend so much of my day looking at screens that sometimes it's like the last thing that I want to do. And so kind of going back to old-fashioned pen and paper has been really helpful for me, just to kind of have my eyes on something else. I think now, like to the degree that it's possible, it can be really helpful and anchoring for people to try to recreate their schedule to the best of their ability. Some of us are busier than ever with final exams coming up. Some of us are maybe just as busy as we were before, but things feel so much harder because of the different circumstances that we find ourselves in now. So I think trying to recreate whatever normal looked like, if you have the space to be able to do so and create some structure and kind of, for me, like separating out a space where I can work and keep that separate from the rest of my life. And I acknowledge that it's not possible for everyone to do that. But I think kind of sectioning off different parts can put us in the best mindset, whether we want to sit down for work or sit down and just enjoy whatever's streaming. So I think if you were happy with your schedule before and you found that it worked out really well for you, that's great. Try to recreate it. And if what you were doing before was difficult or it's too hard to recreate it, then this can be an opportunity to try something new. And so, saying, okay, well, at this time of day at noon, I'm always going to go for a walk, or I'm always going to do yoga. And so having some kind of anchors around different parts of the day, something that I find helpful when like all of the days can definitely kind of mush together. Like sometimes Tuesday and Wednesday don't feel that different from one another. So having different things on different days that I can kind of point to and say, oh, right, like this is a day of the week and it's distinct and separate rather than everything kind of blending together, I find is pretty helpful. So then I would say, we've already spoken a little bit about checking in with your emotional capacity. And what I mean by that is that sometimes when it comes to setting structure and boundaries with other people, there are certain friends who I might feel like we can talk about anything for any number of hours. And there might be certain relationships in my life where, I say if I'm sharing the house with like a parent or a sibling, that like, hey, this is my space right now where I've got class that I have to pay attention to. I've got different things that I have to be working on. And so these are some times when I would appreciate some privacy. And here are some other times when maybe you can check in with me and we can talk, or we can sit down, whatever the case may be. So I think when we're having kind of this internal dialogue about what our boundaries should look like for all the various people that we expect to interact with, it really is, it comes down on one hand to that safety issue. So with certain people like parents who may not understand certain aspects of our lives, whether that's our relationships, our sexuality, our gender identity, what things from them, what mistakes am I willing to kind of accept and move past versus which things do I feel like I need to be quite firm about? And, both for my mental health and for the sake of preserving these relationships. A lot of times when I talk about having boundaries with people, I think that boundaries exist, not just for ourselves, but also for the sake of those relationships. A boundary indicates to me a desire to maintain a relationship with somebody and saying, if we're going to stay in relationship with one another, if I want to keep you in my life, then here are kind of the guidelines in order to continue relating to me effectively in a way that makes me feel respected and loved. So I think still along those same lines of boundaries, like how often do I want to check in with others? So that goes along like understanding what other people are asking for. How often can my friends like check in with me if they want to talk about emotionally sensitive kinds of issues? How much privacy do I need day to day versus am I more introverted and I need some more time kind of on my own to recharge? And so I'd say when you're navigating issues around setting boundaries with friends and family and partners, it's usually not perfect at first. I think that it takes some time to really figure out our preferences and how we want to approach these issues. So I would always encourage a lot of patience and grace with ourselves going through it.
How are we doing on time, Tori? Sorry. You're muted.
Oh yeah.
We are about a half hour or so in.
Cool.
Okay. Okay.
We do have 2 pre-submitted questions, but if like this is all really great information, so I think we're good to continue if you are.
Okay. Can I just make one comment too with the boundaries? Because I think a lot of times, especially within our chosen family, we know like the struggles, we can relate to the struggles that people are having, or like we understand. And I think that, you know, if a friend has been expressing suicidal thoughts, so to speak, or self-harm, or they're just in a really low place, we have resources that we're going to share with you at the end. But that's kind of, I think, part of connecting and supporting and knowing like that you can be there as a support and a cheerleader and a shoulder, but it's also not your responsibility to make sure that your phone is on 24 hours and at a high volume so that you can make sure that you're going to respond to anybody and everybody at any time, because that can be really draining, and that's not setting a healthy boundary for yourself. Like, you need sleep, you need rest, you need to recharge. And that's not to say that you don't care for other people at all. But I do think that this is something that within the community people struggle with, because we lean on each other. So I think, kind of to Tommy's point, talking with your friends or with that friend or family member or somebody, like, here's when I you know, I'm available type of thing. Here's when, you know, if you really need me, XYZ. And I encourage you to reach out here or reach out there, or those types of things, so that everything's not relying just on you as, say, one person. I don't know if other people have any comments off of that, but I think that there's that shared responsibility that's real, and empathy with each other. And I think we can still support each other and set some boundaries of self-care for everybody.
So in addition to, let's say, the people that we're going to interact with, who we already know and are familiar with, whether that's friends and family, if we are, you know, going to be kind of quarantined with them, there's also, of course, a desire to maintain a sense of community that maybe goes outside just your home. So it can be problematic and difficult to live with a lot of people. It can also be really difficult, I think, to feel as though you're isolated. And certainly people can feel lonely when they are by themselves, but it's definitely possible to feel lonely even when you're surrounded by others. And certainly even families can feed into that. So there are already so many good and affirming communities out there. So Trevor Space being, I think, a powerful one, the Pride Center here and the Pride Community Center in Bryan and College Station. If this is your first time engaging in online communities, you know, that can be both really supportive, but it can also be something that takes a lot of one's attention, and it can be difficult to engage in those conversations so often, especially if we are you know, really deeply emotionally impacted by something that someone says either to us or about themselves in that experience. It can dredge up a lot of pain. So my recommendation is, if there are any of these online communities that you go into, if at all possible, join with a friend so you can talk through the things that you're seeing and process it, like, offline. You can, you know, look at each other's posts and support one another. And you can also talk to somebody about when's a good time to, you know, log out and step away and get off the screen if you're finding yourself too engrossed or emotionally engaged in a way that is not really supporting your mental health.
I think this was the space for like maybe self-care tips.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Tommy a self-care tip off of that, of like, Tommy, what do you think about when, you know, we are online and we come across comments and all of that stuff? It can be like a rabbit hole that we get stuck down. And they're not all positive comments.
No, certainly not.
So, I don't know, like, what are your suggestions there? Kind of like, yeah, tips.
Yeah, I would say it's important to go into any of those spaces with kind of like a safety valve in mind. If you're finding yourself really engrossed and maybe going down a rabbit hole, and you're still checking in and noticing some negative emotions coming up, and so this community or this post is not serving you in the way that you think you need right now, then who are some people that I can talk to about this? How can I what's going to help me separate if I'm noticing that this is pulling me in a way that's making me feel uncomfortable or unsafe? So I think, again, we talk so much about setting boundaries with others, but knowing how to set some healthy boundaries with ourselves and say, okay, like if I'm going to go on and I'm concerned that I'm going to have this, difficulty, maybe I'll set a timer for 10 minutes. And maybe when that time is up, no matter how I'm feeling, how engaged I am, that's going to be a time for me to cut out and go do something else with my day. Or if I'm noticing that I'm having a difficult reaction, maybe that's a good time for me to grab one of my guided meditations from San Bella or something that I like on YouTube that I can return to that will kind of help me feel more centered and create some distance from any sort of problematic posts that I may pick up on. And of course, whenever possible, bring in a friend to help process it and create that sense of safety.
Yeah, that's a good point. As you're talking, I'm just thinking too that there's so much affirming content out there too. There's so much affirming. I mean, just think about like YouTube Ellen videos, like that's just even one place, but there are so many different TED Talks. There are different like actual legit resources out there, or spoken word, and just so many different creative things and informative things that people have out there that can be affirming. And, I guess part of that like Rio thing, if we're kind of circling back a little bit, of that recognition of like, is this like draining my well, or is this like feeding my well? And where is my well anyway? What's my water level? And being able to kind of like touch in with yourself in those situations, especially like what you were talking about, Tommy.
And I wonder if we're working with a friend in terms of finding things that are affirming for one another. Sometimes when we're exercising, it helps to have a buddy to kind of keep us accountable. So, maybe saying, hey, I'm going to go ahead and send this to this friend or group of friends, a challenge for the group, for everybody to watch and potentially later discuss and process as a group. How can we use this information to help ourselves as So I think, throughout today, we've talked a lot about different things that could be self-care tips. And so just, wanting folks, again, Claire, you mentioned how right now there's this lack of control, that we do have control. We do have agency over
Iris, am I the only one that Iris is skipping out on?
No, I can't hear Iris either. Tommy, can you hear Iris?
Not currently, no.
Claire, fill up our well.
A little bit of a freeze.
Iris, you were saying something really packed with wisdom and we didn't catch it because you were frozen.
Iris, we missed what you said, and you're muted now.
I don't know where I was. I disappeared and then I came back.
You were like on a roll, Dr. Carillo. You were like in it.
I don't know where I got cut off. Just talking about self-care and, you know, being intentional and making those choices and that time for ourselves.
Yeah. I really like your idea, the suggestion of like doing something together too, right? Like kind of, I like that idea of watch or read something and then like, let's talk about it. That's an awesome way to like stay connected and to keep like affirming and working through stuff together.
Yeah, I think there's so many like affirming LGBT history podcasts and stuff out there. Like that has been like a really great escape. Like I've been running and listening to these things. I started running. Thanks, Tommy, for that tip. But yeah, like LGBT history on Instagram has all these posts about LGBT history that led me to the podcast, and like having that like history and like really thinking through like what like just has gone on, right? Like in like the whole human history of like LGBT stuff has been very wonderful. But yeah, I might start sharing them with friends. That's a really great suggestion, Iris.
What do we have next?
Let's find out.
Okay.
Oh, great resources.
You want to talk about them?
Yeah, let's all talk about them. So I definitely recommend the Trevor Lifeline. I think they do excellent work. You know, and whether you're more comfortable texting or more comfortable talking, depending on, their counselors are so compassionate and knowledgeable about specifically Q+ resources that I think they're easy ones to recommend if you know if you're in a place where it would be better to talk to someone who is anonymous rather than feel like you are, you know, burdening a friend, whether or not that's true or whether that's the case. You know, talking to a counselor around these issues is, I think, very empowering and validating. So they're one that I strongly recommend.
Yeah, they have a strong presence, and I think also the Trans Lifeline is unique in the fact that trans identified folks are the folks who are like staffing and running the hotline. Mm-hmm. And so there's like that added layer of connection, I think, of people that like kind of get it, so to speak, and you can kind of just like start from there and be able to kind of talk through what you're experiencing with people who may have been in the same different stages that you're going through right now. And I think that's the same with any crisis line. They're going to walk with you, whatever the crisis line is. But I think that the Trans Lifeline is just like, is very unique for our trans non-binary community. I think we have a bunch of CAPS resources next, maybe.
Yes, and I apologize. My connection has been really bad this evening, and so I've been, you know, coming in and out, and so sorry about that.
I still feel connected to you.
Yeah, we missed you.
Well, let's see how long my connection works, but you know, something that we have to offer, you know, we're still providing services.
I think Dr. Carillo was saying we're still providing services. We've put some of those
triage over the phone to see what would best meet your needs. And so that may be teletherapy. We are providing that in a short-term basis, or it could be, again, a referral out to the community. We do have our workshops, like Claire mentioned earlier, now on video. So we do have our anxiety toolbox, our getting unstuck, accepting emotions, and perfectionism workshops online. So you can go ahead and just view them without even having to speak to a counselor if you think any of those would be helpful to you. What else do we have? Can we see the next slide?
Yeah, I think this is our last one.
It's our fun slide.
Fantastic.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
Hey there.
Let's see. Oh, there is one more, so we can go back to
Yes.
share.
Yeah. Bam.
Great.
So
Yeah. Go ahead.
helpline is still, it's between 4 p.m., 8 a.m. on weekdays, and then 24 hours on the weekend. We have our Cognito, which is something that anybody can take. It's a simulation on how you would talk to someone who is struggling. And so if you sometimes don't know how you would talk to a friend who's struggling, you know, this would be a great way. It's a virtual setting. It's kind of like a video game where you practice what you would say to a friend who's in need. We also have like a wellness calendar that we have put out. I think Claire and Tommy have pitched Sambello. So if you don't have Sambello, you can download that app. It is free with your A&M email address, a free subscription. And so that is an excellent way. It's a mental and wellness app. And so that's an excellent way of being able to track your mood. Like Claire was saying, it'll ask you repeatedly throughout the day how you're feeling, to track maybe, you know, your water intake, your sleep. It also has some great guided meditations and other exercises that could be useful to you. And then we also have Let's Talk. So, you know, we started Let's Talk at the Q Plus, at the LGBTQ Plus Pride Center back in January. And Tommy and Claire were our Let's Talk counselors there on Mondays from 1 to 3. And so we had to pause our Let's Talk program when we started shifting to being online. But that will be up and running in the next few weeks. We're trying to figure out the platform and how to get folks registered and all that. So please be on alert for some social media posts about our Let's Talk program so that you can visit us there. It's not counseling, it's more outreach, or now we're using the term telereach. And so it's about having like a 30-minute or so consultation with one of our Let's Talk counselors, just to talk about what's going on in your life. How are you dealing with things at home, with parents, with friends, with the isolation? How are you doing with self-care? And so it's more of a consultation. And if you need a little bit more support, then the Let's Talk counselors will suggest that you schedule that initial teleconsultation with CAPS so that you can have more recommendations about what you need. Any other resources that I forgot to mention, Claire and Tommy?
I would add that Sambello Premium is currently available across the board, so not just to A&M students. So if you know of any friends and family members that may benefit, I would recommend sharing it with them as well.
Good to know.
That's awesome. We have a couple of pre-submitted questions, and then if anyone watching on Facebook Live has questions for Claire, Tommy, or Dr. Iris, you can submit those and we will ask them as well. If you want to, I can't get to the questions with the sign up.
Allow me to stop sharing.
Thank you. All right, so our first pre-submitted question are, what are some coping mechanisms for closeted people for dealing with homophobia while being forced to stay at home?
I think what we've been talking about today in terms of social connections, reaching out to friends, to chosen family, to online communities, to have that validation, to have that support, to be able to kind of vent and process what's going on at home. I think just the ability of being heard and valued can come a long way. That is not necessarily going to change the situation at home, but at least you will have that support and that outlet that may help you manage that time while we're still having to do this isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So our second pre-submitted question is, I'm sorry, did anyone else want to add? I sort of jumped there.
We could jump because it'll probably all flow together.
So I'm a community member who is concerned about the lack of mental health resources in College Station area, especially for the underserved LGBTQ plus children and low income. How can we advocate better care so that people don't have to go to Houston or Austin to get mental health care?
I would say, honestly, right now is kind of a great time to be able to access care that's specific to LGBTQ plus community, because pretty much everybody is operating through teletherapy right now. So as long as the provider that you find is within Texas, everybody has like different licensing, certifications and all of that. But typically if your provider is a licensed counselor, psychologist, social worker in Texas, they can literally be anywhere. You can be anywhere. So I think that physical distance may be like taken away right now because of the shift to online for this time period. I do hear after that, though, that might be an issue. But for the right now, I think that barrier has been chopped right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a really important time to do some advocacy in our own community around those issues to make sure that counselors and therapists are equipped to be able to give that kind of support to Q plus, and especially to children who may not be getting that kind of support in their school systems from a school counselor, let's say. And so I do think that right now, the playing field has been leveled in a sense, that we're all doing teletherapy. And so right now, the best place to find affirming care would probably be through like Psychology Today and looking for therapists across Texas. We're providing like trans affirmative, Q plus affirmative psychotherapy via teletherapy, at least for the time being. But I think the work in our community, this is the time to kind of deal with that ground game issue. So yeah, it is critically important.
You mentioned Psychology Today as a resource people can go to look. Is there any question or like questions you would ask if you were, LGBT to sort of like as like a litmus test to see if someone would be like affirming? Is there a way to ask, are you like LGBT affirming without, like potentially causing more harm? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. So oftentimes therapists, counselors, psychologists on Psychology Today will use, they will market and advertise themselves in that way if that's the kind of care that they feel competent in providing. But I think it is still totally valuable and reasonable to, connect with them and to ask, okay, well, what kind of experience do you have? If I'm coming in with these issues, do you have experience in these issues? Is it something that you're comfortable in and competent in? And I think, and some people might phrase that a little bit more diplomatically than I did, but it's a valid question to ask about their experience, especially if it's just something that is marketed, but it's not immediately clear, like if they've got different trainings or CV posted that indicates maybe a lot of the experiences that they've had to kind of show their bona fides in that respect.
Yeah, and I think to that point, you can read the paragraphs or bios that they have and kind of see the language that people are using. And if they're using and like intentional, inclusive language, that's one thing. The other thing too is that as a client or potential client, like you are in the driver's seat. So you have the right to ask whatever you want to somebody that you're even scheduled with an intake, and you're not required or committed. You don't have to commit to continue with that person.
Right.
So if you're doing a phone call just to say, hey, do you have spots available? And like, are you familiar XYZ? If you don't get a good vibe, that's cool. Like just, you can hang up when that call is done and you don't need to talk to them again. You can keep it. It does take time. It does take energy to sometimes find somebody that you feel like you feel safe and can click with. But I just want to remind us that like that's your right to be able to do that.
I think definitely being direct and even asking, how many LGBTQ plus clients have you had in the past, and what have been some of their presenting concerns, and what has been your approach to the work. I think if the person is a trans and LGBTQ plus affirming therapist, they're going to know that those are the questions that are going to be asked, and they're not going to be offended because they'll know, like, yes, this person is, really exploring to see who is going to be a good match for them. But, I think some of the folks on Psychology Today and other places have a sliding scale, but many do not. And even the sliding scale can be a little bit too much for some folks who are, working class. And I think that was part of the question, what if it's, working class community? What if people don't have insurance that can cover, the copay? And so I do think that that is more of a systemic issue that, we need to, advocate, at the Capitol in terms of improving just mental health resources in general for the entire state of Texas, but then for more vulnerable communities. And so that has to be done at the state and national level to advocate for more resources. And then here at the local level, can a coalition be started? Like, can we go to different mental health providers and different agencies in town to see who does experience in providing those services, who would be willing to do pro bono X amount of clients or sessions a month, or a low a sliding scale. And so can we create that kind of coalition that folks would know who these mental health providers are in town? Just would be another option for some folks.
That's a great idea. And like continued professional development for those providers, and also for others who may want to learn more and expand.
Yeah, those are some really awesome points. Thank you all so much. So we're at time, so I wanted to give you all a moment if you had any final thoughts or wrap up comments for us.
I guess please reach out to CAPS. This could be at our Let's Talk in a few weeks. If you just want to drop it in for a consult, it could be, for an initial teleconsultation. It could be calling helpline. It can be using Sambello. Just utilize services, reach out to us, because we're here to provide support, and reach out to each other. Maintain those social connections. That's really what's going to keep all of us afloat, but especially, our LGBTQ plus students. That connection is going to be just so important in navigating really challenging situations that a lot of them are facing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to encourage some maybe making intentional space, but some space and time for self-compassion, because we might not really be receiving that outside of us. And that's like a lifelong journey skill type of thing, but why not start now? And there are a lot of resources out there, Sambello included, but that can help just kind of bolster and enhance that self-compassion, because you got you. And this is an opportunity to build your relationship with yourself too, a supportive, affirming relationship with yourself.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful and salient point. And I think that stressing self-compassion, and that, regardless of what's going on, we want to continue to be a resource for all of you. So please never hesitate to reach out if you're wanting support.
Word.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. This has been really enlightening and informative, and I think so timely, especially with what is going on. So this is awesome. I wanted to plug last minute that the center will be having a lavender graduation celebration. So please submit. We want to celebrate all of our Aggies and all of their wonderful accomplishments this year. Even if it's not in person, that does not mean it is any less special and empowering. And also our keynote speaker will be Anise Parker. She was the first out mayor of Houston, and so that's going to be so awesome. All right.
Cool.
Thank you so much, and everyone stay healthy and safe.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Tori.
Good
Thanks,
seeing you
everyone.
all. Thank you. Good night.